Luffy will awaken his devil fruit in Wano. Also, this video has manga spoilers, but this one doesn't. A few chapters ago, Law and Kid surprised us when they revealed that they've actually started to awaken their devil fruits. But perhaps the most exciting thing about this was that it pretty much confirmed that Luffy was gonna awaken his devil fruit in Wano. Because throughout the story, Kid and Law have been the two supernovas standing right next to Luffy as his rivals, and although they might have a leg up on him currently when it comes to devil fruit awakening, that's not gonna last very long. So in this video, we'll be breaking down everything we know about devil fruit awakenings, how that applies to Luffy's devil fruit powers, and specifically when exactly Luffy will awaken his devil fruit powers in Wano. But first off, if you are not already, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can be part of the King Pirates crew. And also, if you're having a good time watching this video, be sure to drop a like for the YouTube algorithm. I would really appreciate it. But let's start by breaking down everything we know about devil fruit awakening, because Law and Kid showcasing their awakenings really gave us some interesting new info. Before seeing Law and Kid use their abilities, we didn't really have that much information on devil fruit awakening. The first time we really got some in-depth information and an explanation was when Doflamingo talked about it. Pretty much right in the middle of his battle against Luffy, he just started flexing his knowledge and explaining devil fruit awakenings. But what's interesting is that Doflamingo specifically described it as applying your devil fruit powers to objects instead of just yourself. And of course, when he used his powers, he showcased that firsthand. Not only turning the ground into string when he touched it, but also pretty much the entire surrounding environment was being turned into string, like buildings and stuff. And what's important to note is that he was able to affect the environment without actually touching it. But besides that, that's pretty much all we saw with Doflamingo's devil fruit awakening, but it was the first time we really got a proper explanation and got to see a paramecia awakening. So just based off of that information, it seemed like on the surface level, a paramecia devil fruit awakening allowed the user to affect this environment. And that idea gets re-emphasized when we see Katakuri using his devil fruit awakening, where he pretty much just turned his surrounding environment into mochi. So there seemed to be a pretty clear consistency with devil fruit awakening, at least for paramecias, and with Luffy being a paramecia as well, it seemed like his devil fruit awakening was gonna be pretty straightforward. Just like Doflamingo and Katakuri, he would be able to affect his surroundings with his devil fruit power, and pretty much just turn everything into rubber and create a big bounce house. And although I think people are sleeping on the potential of that ability, I don't think it's gonna be that straightforward. Despite Luffy having a very simple devil fruit throughout the entire story, he's been very creative with it, and I don't think that's gonna change when it comes to his devil fruit awakening either. So as many people suspected, there had to be more to devil fruit awakening than what we saw, and this is where the new information that we saw from Law and Kid's devil fruit awakenings really come in handy. Because Kid and Law, just like Katakuri and Doflamingo, are also paramecias, and I think the powers they showed off with their devil fruit awakenings was consistent with what we saw from Doflamingo and Katakuri, but at the same time introduced some new abilities that we didn't know before. Starting off with Law, the attack he used on Big Mom was an attack called Anesthesia, but what was interesting was how he actually set up the attack. Usually when Law sets up an attack, he has to use room to create this bubble as like an operation room, but this time instead of using room and creating this giant bubble, he uses Kroom, and Kroom is actually this tiny bubble which he then applies to his sword, and then with that sword he was able to use Anesthesia on Big Mom. But what's interesting was that he was able to attack her from a distance without actually touching her. Now this was very interesting because although it seemed quite different from the devil fruit awakenings of Doflamingo and Katakuri, I still think the idea is pretty similar, because as Doflamingo explained, devil fruit awakenings allow you to apply your power to objects, and that's pretty much what Law did. Instead of creating a giant operation room, he just takes that and applies it to his sword. So that part of the attack I think was very consistent from what we saw before, but what was interesting was that he was then able to use his attack on Big Mom without being anywhere near her. And although that's kind of similar to Doflamingo turning like the surrounding buildings into string, essentially also being able to use his powers without touching other things, but what Law is doing here instead I think goes one step beyond that, where he's not only using his powers on the object with his sword or the environment, he's actually using his powers and kind of applying it to Big Mom, who's an actual human being. At least that's my understanding of it. I think Law showcased for the first time that you could apply your powers to other people, and then that idea pretty much gets re-emphasized when we see Eustace Kid do it just seconds later. Immediately after Law's attack, Kid uses an attack called a sign, where he pretty much just applies his magnetic powers to Big Mom, so all the scraps and steel beams just go directly towards her. So when it comes down to it, I think Kid and Law's devil fruit awakening abilities were still consistent in that they were still applying their powers to other things beyond themselves, but this time both of them showcased something new in being able to apply their powers to other people as opposed to just objects. And in my opinion, this makes things much more interesting, especially with paramecias. Like even if we just look at Law's attack, how do you defend against that? Is it even possible to fight back against somebody else applying their own devil fruit powers onto you? I would guess most likely Haki is the answer for that, because that does work as a counter against devil fruits, but I do think what Kid and Law showcased case completely changes the game and makes things more interesting. The other thing I don't want to overlook either is how much damage Law did to Big Mom. Like, he properly did some damage. She was bleeding out the mouth to the point where in the recent chapter she even gave them some respect, saying like, I haven't been in this much pain in decades. So although it's not really confirmed, I do think awakening your devil fruit makes your devil fruit abilities stronger, because I don't think a regular anesthesia attack is doing that much damage to Big Mom. And actually, devil fruit awakenings making your devil fruit powers stronger is something we actually saw previously in the story, because the first time we actually heard of devil fruit awakenings in the story was all the way back in Impel Down. Back in Impel Down, we met the jailer beasts who Crocodile revealed were awakened zone devil fruit users, and he highlighted that essentially all their powers were elevated to another level. So essentially, with them being zone devil fruit users, it meant they got stronger, faster, and more durable. And I think that makes perfect sense. If you awaken your devil fruit, it should make it stronger, which is probably why Law was able to do so much damage with his anesthesia attack. So I think if we take all the information that we know, devil fruit awakenings allow you to apply your devil fruit powers beyond yourself, not only to objects in the surrounding environment, but even other people. And also, because your devil fruit is awakened, it takes your abilities to another level. So with that being said, let's talk about how that would apply to Luffy's devil fruit. And the first thing we have to address is the popular theory that Luffy can create essentially a rubber world. Now, like I mentioned earlier, I do think Luffy's devil fruit powers will be more than this, but I also don't think we should sleep on this power or ignore it just because it's popular and pretty self-explanatory. First off, if we're just going off the information that we know, there's no reason why Luffy can't use his powers that way. Like, even if he doesn't use his awakened abilities in that way, he should still be able to do that. So I think the explanation for this rubber world power makes perfect sense. And when you add in the theory of the ability perfectly countering Blackbeard's Quake fruit, I think it's pretty much guaranteed that Luffy will use his powers in that way at some point. And also, I do think people are kind of sleeping on the potential of this power. Some people just don't like the power because it seems very simple, but at the core of Luffy's devil fruit is a very simple devil fruit. At the end of the day, his body is just really stretchy and he uses that to his advantage. So if he's able to apply that same power to objects and the environment, I think it'll be very helpful to him. Like, even if we just think about it in the most simple terms, he could just turn a weapon into rubber and it won't hurt him. Now obviously hockey is involved, so he's not going to be able to just do that all the time, but that's just a very simple example of how he can use his power to help himself. And I think what I love the most with this idea is how Luffy can shape his environment to his advantage, because by shaping the environment, essentially he decides the battlefield. So imagine if he hits somebody into the ground, but he turns the ground into rubber, and now that ground bounces the opponent right back, so now he can follow up with an even stronger attack. When I first thought about this, the first thing that came to my head was Dragon Ball Z, where you have one character knocking somebody in the air, teleporting right back up and smacking them right back down using that momentum against them. That's pretty much what Luffy can do, because he would have control of the battlefield. And because he's used to his power and he thinks very quickly, I think he can really pick and choose his spots. Like, sometimes he can have them bounce back, but sometimes maybe they just crash into a wall. So I think when Luffy finally awakens his devil fruit, this bounce house ability will be used and Luffy's gonna use it very well, but also I don't expect it to be the only ability. And with the new information we got out of Kid and Law's devil fruit awakenings, I think that opens some new possibilities of how Luffy can use his power. Now I will say I don't really have a confident guess at how Luffy will like epically use this skill, because Luffy's power is very unique in that it's pretty defensive, so if you apply his rubber powers to somebody else, you really just kind of help them out. So maybe there really isn't a way where Luffy can apply his powers to someone else and really help himself, and that could be why we didn't see Katakuri or Doflamingo using the awakening abilities in that way. But I feel like with how creative Luffy is, he could definitely use it to his advantage. The only ones I could think of right now are quite silly, because I'm more so thinking about the possibility of turning somebody else into rubber and then taking that away, because that would cause a pretty drastic change to your body. Like, say Luffy punches somebody really hard, turns them into rubber, and then their body is like knocked back and their organs are all shifted out of place, but then all of a sudden he takes that rubber ability away. Does that just mess up their body? Or like, this one's kind of silly, but if he just turns them into rubber and starts twisting them around like sometimes he does with his attacks, but then he just removes that rubber ability, does he crack all their bones? So I guess that's really the next thing I'm curious about, is like, what happens when you apply your powers to somebody else and then take that away? Because if it really works that way, Luffy can definitely use that to his advantage. Like, even him just applying his power to somebody else is probably gonna feel very weird to them. At this point, Luffy's adjusted to his body, but if you just apply that randomly to somebody else and all of a sudden their limbs are going everywhere, they're gonna be out of rhythm. Like, maybe it could be a scenario where somebody is going to attack you, you apply that power to their arm, and all of a sudden their arm's flinging upwards and they don't know what to do with themselves. So I think the surprise element of that could come in handy. Like, even when we saw Kid apply his powers to Big Mom was kind of flustered there for a second. But the other thing we do have to take into account is how much this really strains your body, because Kid and Law, after just using one attack each, are absolutely exhausted, so Luffy might not not be able to consistently use it as much as he wants. But at the end of the day, I really see Devil Fruit Awakening as a great complementary skill for Luffy, and then eventually I think he'll have a Gear 5th that he figures out to power himself up. But with that being said, let's get to the final question of when Luffy will awaken his Devil Fruits. First off, as I said in the intro, I do think he's gonna awaken in Wano because we did just see it from Law and Kid, and because he's fighting Kaido right now, I'm expecting it to come against Kaido. But it almost feels kind of crazy that he's gonna get another power up against Kaido because he's gotten so many already, learning Ryo, Advanced Conqueror's Haki. It almost seems unrealistic that he gets another power up. But I think first off, it just speaks to how strong Kaido is, that Luffy needs all this help and all these power ups to just even the playing field. And also, if anything, I think this power up makes the most sense for Luffy. Throughout the story, we've consistently seen Luffy just pull power ups left and right out of nowhere. He learns incredibly quickly when he's in the heat of the battle, which allowed him to do things like learn Future Sight in the middle of the battle against Katakuri, Advanced Conqueror's Haki against Kaido. But when it comes to Devil Fruit Awakening, this is like the one thing he's had a lot of time to actually learn about and train on. He found out about this all the way back in Dressrosa, so he's had a good period of time to actually try to figure this out. And I think especially when during that time period, Law somehow learned Devil Fruit Awakening, it makes perfect sense that this is something that Luffy learned as well. And you might be saying, like, if he knew this the whole time, why hasn't he used it? And I think the simple answer is he just hasn't had a chance because Kaido's been clapping him the whole time. Kid and Law never had a chance to use theirs either because Kaido Thunder Bagua them too quickly. And one interesting thing a lot of people have pointed out is that Luffy might have been already preparing to use that power, because the last time he got clapped by Kaido and knocked off of Onigashima, Kaido had this line of dialogue kind of mocking Luffy, saying like, what were you calling that? Gomu Gomu no what? And we all got hyped because Kaido was talking mad trash, but maybe Luffy was preparing to use his Devil Fruit Awakening. So I think that would be a great way to foreshadow Luffy using his awakening, and I do think it should probably come pretty soon, like after we get the Sanji and Queen battle sorted out and Zoro versus King, then we probably head back up to the rooftop, and that's when Luffy will use awakening to catch up even more to Kaido. But even then, I'm still not ready to say Luffy's gonna defeat Kaido because Kaido still has awakening. But yeah, as far as when Luffy's gonna get awakening, it definitely has to happen soon, especially because we have that ticking time bomb. I believe it was 5 minutes before Onigashima was gonna land on Wano, and while I don't necessarily think Kaido has to be defeated by then, I do think before that happens, Luffy has to really ramp things up and take things to another level. And also, Luffy awakening his Devil Fruit might actually help out the situation, because if he's able to change Onigashima into like rubber, that could kind of lessen the damage it does on Wano. Now obviously Momonosuke definitely still has to do his part and create his own moment, but it does seem like stopping Onigashima is kind of a team effort between Luffy, Yamato, and Momo, where Momo kind of has to lift up the island and slow things down, and Luffy has to slow down Kaido, and meanwhile Yamato is on her own mission to get rid of the weapon so Onigashima just doesn't blow up. But yeah, I suspect Luffy's awakening to be coming very soon. It might still not be enough to defeat Kaido, but I think we'll be seeing Onigashima as a big bounce house very soon. Alright, we're playing heads or tails today. If you guess wrong, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, and watch this video. Okay, and the answer is tails.